Annoying family forgot seizure medicine in their room, but guess what it really was? So, I work at two hotels under the Crilton brand, Brampton Inn and Chromewood Suites. Most of my wild work stories come from the Brampton, but this little fiasco happened over at the Chromewood. It all started with what seemed like a normal family checking in. They were polite enough and everything was going fine until they asked to extend their stay. Unfortunately, we were fully booked at the Chromewood, but I managed to get them a room at the Brampton Inn down the road. Fast forward to later that night and here comes one of the older kids from the family back at my desk looking kind of stressed. He tells me they forgot his sister's seizure medicine in their Chromewood room's desk drawer. Luckily for him, the room hadn't been assigned to anyone new yet, so I let him in to check. But there was no medicine in sight. I took him to our lost and found in housekeeping, let him rummage through, but it wasn't there either. This kid was clearly hoping I could perform a miracle, but I was really hoping he'd just leave and sort it out in the morning. Not long after, his parents show up, frazzled and insistent that this medicine needs to be found now. They make me check every drawer at my desk, then they want access to the back office. I tried explaining that if housekeeping found it, it'd be locked in their lost and found, not brought over to the front desk. They weren't having it. Then they started insisting I call the housekeeper who cleaned their room. I could see who cleaned it last, but honestly most of the housekeepers don't speak much English and we were hitting closing time. But I made the call anyway, and after going through my assistant general manager, we finally got the housekeeping manager on the line. She checked with the housekeeper and a supervisor who'd inspected the room, and they both swore there was no medicine left behind. Of course, this isn't enough for them. The mom started threatening to call the police, claiming we'd lost their seizure medicine, while the dad was begging me to review security footage to see who cleaned their room. FYI, our hotel isn't exactly filled with cameras in every hallway. Luckily, my assistant GM stepped in and managed to say something that finally calmed them down enough to leave. So we all move on, hoping that's the end of it, until morning rolls around and we find out what was really in that room. Turns out this was not about seizure meds at all. The medicine was actually a little black box containing hundreds and hundreds of dollars in cash they'd stashed in a drawer. The housekeeper who found it in the end? She got a hefty tip for her honesty. TLDR, family left their seizure medicine in their hotel room, except it was actually a small fortune. The next morning, I came back on shift and found out the whole truth about this medicine situation. Apparently, once the family realized it was cash they'd left behind instead of actual medication, their tune changed real quick. Word had gotten around to management, and they confirmed that a housekeeper did eventually find the little black box tucked in a drawer. Of course, this all happened after hours of needless panic the night before. The parents even came back looking a bit sheepish but mostly relieved. The best part? The family handed the housekeeper a fat tip for her honesty. She ended up with a couple $100s for turning in the box. They were all smiles, making a huge fuss over how grateful they were, as if they hadn't spent half the night accusing us of losing their seizure medicine. Guess it's easier to be nice when the cash is back in hand. After everything was said and done, I got a little chat from my manager. She thanked me for going above and beyond, and we had a good laugh about the whole seizure medicine mix-up. She said it was impressive that I managed to keep my cool with the family, despite all their late-night demands. Still, the next time someone says they left medicine in the room, I think I'll be a little suspicious. A few days later, I thought the saga was fully behind me, until I got wind of some unexpected fallout from the whole seizure medicine incident. One of my colleagues at Brampton Inn pulled me aside and filled me in on what happened after the family had moved hotels. Apparently, when they checked in over at Brampton, the family kept bringing up the incident with everyone they talked to. They'd corner a staff member retelling their version of events, claiming that we had somehow endangered their medicine and how lucky they were that the cash was found. They didn't seem to realize that repeatedly referring to it as medicine was probably confusing the Brampton team and making everyone even more suspicious. At one point, the dad even went as far as telling the story to a guest waiting in line behind him at check-in. He made it sound like they'd survived a major crime heist, sprinkling in little hints that the security at Chromewood could use an upgrade, almost as if they were implying someone tried to take their money. Naturally, this story got passed around the Brampton team as a bit of a running joke, with each retelling becoming a little more dramatic. We all started referring to the incident as the Great Seizure Medicine Robbery, and it got to the point where even the Brampton staff were saying things like, "Got any seizure medicine? Better lock it up before housekeeping finds it." It became a fun inside joke that kept everyone in high spirits whenever the workday dragged. Then came the kicker. The family apparently called up corporate, saying they had concerns about staff integrity at the Chromewood. They were furious that they had to go through the whole ordeal just to get their cash back. According to corporate's notes, they had put in a formal complaint that demanded Chromewood staff improve their handling of guest valuables. They never once acknowledged how intense and dramatic they were acting that night or the fact that they had conveniently disguised hundreds of dollars as seizure medicine from the get-go. Corporate ended up calling my manager about the complaint, which led to another meeting with our team. While no one was in trouble, in fact we got a ton of praise for how calm we stayed, management took the opportunity to tighten up our procedures for dealing with lost medicine or high-value items. It was actually a good move. They reviewed with us how lost and found should be handled when guests claim high-value items, and we got a refresher on how to direct these issues to security and management more efficiently. Meanwhile, the housekeeping manager made sure to get the housekeeper a little extra recognition. They gave her a spot bonus for honesty on top of the cash tip from the family. She was incredibly grateful, and while she was a quiet person, she seemed genuinely touched by the recognition. She later told me she hadn't even opened the box when she found it in the drawer. She just turned it in right away, which speaks volumes about her integrity. I'd always known the housekeepers worked hard and put up with a lot, but this incident really highlighted how much they're willing to do to ensure our guests feel safe and respected. In the end, the great seizure medicine robbery became a part of our Chromewood folklore. I still work both hotels, and whenever I catch up with Brampton staff, we'll sometimes joke about it. Don't forget to double-check for seizure medicine. And to this day, anytime a guest tells me they left something behind, my first question is it actual medicine or is it medicine? Despite the drama, this experience ended up bringing our whole team closer. We all learned a thing or two about staying calm in stressful situations, handling suspicious circumstances with professionalism, and just how hilarious some guest interactions can be when you take a step back. So, for all the night shifts and strange encounters, this one's probably my favorite story yet. The weeks rolled on, and I thought I'd seen the last of that family's medicine fiasco, but there was still one more twist waiting for me. A month or so after the incident, I was working a night shift when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was the dad from the infamous seizure medicine family, calling from some vacation spot down south. He started off polite, but I could tell there was something brewing under the surface. After a little small talk, he got to his real reason for calling. He wanted me to send him some written verification that we'd found his valuable items. Apparently, he needed it for his records. I had no idea what to make of this request. No guest had ever called back weeks after a stay to ask for written verification about lost and found items. I politely explained that, for privacy and security reasons, we didn't issue written statements regarding lost and found items after the fact, especially after they'd been recovered by the guest. He didn't take it well. "You know, this whole ordeal could have been handled way better," he huffed. "If I'd known it would take all night to get our things back, I would have called the police from the start. My daughter's medication could have been compromised." Yep, he was still using that seizure medicine excuse. At this point, I didn't want to outright challenge him about what was actually in the black box, but I gently reminded him that we had protocols for managing lost items, and the hotel did everything possible to assist them, even going beyond what's typically required. I mentioned that the housekeeping manager, assistant GM, and even corporate had already been involved in resolving the matter. Apparently, this wasn't the answer he wanted. He insisted on speaking to a manager, but since it was late, I let him know they wouldn't be available until the morning. He grumbled something about taking this higher up and hung up. The next morning, I filled my manager in on the call and she laughed in disbelief. "What exactly does he think we're going to verify?" she asked, rolling her eyes. That his medicine magically turned into cash overnight? But the story didn't end there. About a week later, we got a formal letter addressed to the Chromewood from the dad, demanding a written statement confirming the recovery of his valuables, along with an apology for the stress and potential danger caused by the delay in retrieving their belongings. He added a line about potential legal action if we didn't comply. Now, at this point, even our corporate team was getting a little tired of the family's demands, and I can't say I blame them. However, to keep things formal and professional, they drafted a generic response. The letter confirmed that the item had been found and returned as per standard lost and found policy and thanked them for bringing the matter to our attention, but it made no mention of what the item actually was. They also added that the family's case had been escalated as high as possible, and no further action would be taken. I thought that would be the end of it, but boy was I wrong. Fast forward to about 2 months later, I'm working a regular night shift when I hear a knock on the front desk window. I look up and there's the same dad right there in front of me. He had actually come all the way back to Chromewood, apparently hoping to speak to someone in person. My jaw practically hit the floor. I asked if there was anything I could help him with, trying to keep my tone as neutral as possible, but he got straight to the point. "I need to speak to someone about my daughter's medicine," he began, keeping his voice low but stern. "This is my third attempt to get some real answers from your team." Inwardly, I was thinking, third attempt? This is the third attempt you've made about this imaginary medicine. But I kept my expression polite and explained that I'd informed management of his visit and that he was welcome to leave any further information with me. He took a deep breath, shook his head, and muttered, "You know, I just thought your hotel would be more compassionate about something so important." This time I couldn't hold back. "Sir," I replied carefully, "we did our best to assist you that night, and I'm glad your item was found safe and sound. The housekeeper who located it has already been commended for her honesty, and I think you can agree she handled it very professionally. I understand that you feel strongly about this situation, but we've followed every protocol we have." He paused, clearly frustrated. I could see he was ready to say more, but he seemed to realize he wasn't getting any further with me. After a few seconds he nodded, mumbled a thank you, and left without another word. I watched him walk away, hoping that was the last I'd ever see of him. Later, I found out that after his visit he actually filed a complaint with the city's tourism board, alleging that Chromewood lacked proper protocols for guest belongings. Of course, nothing came of it. Corporate sent another formal response reiterating that the matter was closed. In the end, the whole ordeal became a permanent legend within both hotels, even reaching some of the other Crilton hotels in the area. Staff would joke about seizure medicine every time we had an unusually insistent guest with a mysterious lost item. Even new hires quickly learned about the infamous black box incident, thanks to the stories passed down by the veterans. But the absolute best part? About a year after the whole thing, a fellow staff member handed me a small empty black gift box with a wink. "For when they come looking for their medicine again," he joked. We laughed so hard we had to hold on to the counter. The box now sits in our break room, a quiet reminder of one of the strangest guest encounters we've ever dealt with, and the lengths people will go to protect their seizure medicine. Months passed and I assumed the legend of the black box was over, just another quirky tale that would be passed down among staff as a reminder of our oddest guests. But the memory of that family managed to resurface in a surprising way. One night, I was on shift at the Brampton Inn when a trainee asked if I had any advice for handling high-maintenance guests. I chuckled, and without thinking, I brought up the seizure medicine story as an example of why it's best to stay calm and follow protocol, no matter how insistent a guest might be. The trainee laughed and shook his head, shocked that someone would go to such lengths over hidden cash. Little did I know the seizure medicine legend had somehow spread beyond our hotels. Far beyond, in fact. A couple of weeks after I told the trainee the story, I came across a post on a popular hotel industry forum online. The post was titled, "Seizure Medicine or Secret Stash? Most ridiculous guest requests you've had." The user who shared the story had written a suspiciously similar version of my own tale, right down to the details about the hundreds of dollars in a black box and the demanding family. Curious, I started scrolling through the comments, only to realize that multiple people from different hotels across the country had similar stories. In fact, some had even more bizarre twists, like guests who left behind items disguised as sensitive documents that turned out to be rolls of cash or expensive jewelry. One commenter even claimed that a guest had left an empty black box as a decoy, assuming staff would only look there and leave the real stash hidden in the room. It seemed like the seizure medicine trick wasn't just a one-off eccentricity from our guests. It was part of a weird trend among certain types of hotel goers. According to some commenters, the tactic was actually a well-known trick in some circles. Guests would disguise valuables as essential medications or something else that sounded crucial, so staff would feel pressured to turn everything upside down looking for it. Apparently, some guests hoped this would encourage less thorough staff to pocket the valuables so the guests could claim a theft and demand compensation from the hotel. This discovery fascinated me and I couldn't help but share it with my colleagues. Soon, everyone was talking about the seizure medicine phenomenon, and it became a running theme in our meetings. Our managers took it seriously too, reiterating that we needed to stay on our guard and follow protocol to the letter, especially with high-value lost and found items. Then, in a strange twist, we started noticing more and more guests forgetting things in their rooms that sounded suspiciously like high-value items disguised as medical necessities. Within a few months, I had guests asking me if we'd found everything from pain relief kits to life-saving vitamins that, when pressed, they'd describe as being stored in discrete boxes or special containers. The strange part was that most of these guests would drop the issue after I told them to check with housekeeping or assured them we'd follow up with lost and found protocol. One night, though, we had an incident that put our protocols to the test in a whole new way. A man checked in with a single bag, but during his stay he would often be seen hauling a big duffel bag around, as if he had valuables he didn't want to leave in the room. He kept mostly to himself, but about 2 days into his stay he approached the desk looking frantic. "Did anyone report finding a small locked box?" he asked, clearly distressed. "It has, my mother's medicine in it. She passed recently, so it's really important I get it back." Trying to maintain my composure, I nodded and told him we'd checked the lost and found. Sure enough, we found nothing matching his description. When I relayed this information to him, he asked if we could check with housekeeping or perhaps call the police to start a formal report on the missing item. I dealt with my fair share of frantic guests by this point, but his insistence immediately raised red flags. I gently explained that if housekeeping hadn't located the item, it likely wasn't in the room. I assured him we'd follow up with security, but that seemed to set him off. No, you don't understand. This isn't just any box, it has sentimental value. I need you to review the camera footage, and if I don't have it by morning, I'm calling the cops." At this point, I was almost certain this was another case of the seizure medicine trick. But he looked genuinely upset, pacing back and forth, muttering about sentimental value and family heirlooms. I called my manager, who, by now, had dealt with so many of these incidents that she almost had a protocol of her own for it. She listened to his demands, nodded, and then calmly asked him to describe the box in detail. As soon as he mentioned that it was a small, heavy, locked container, she politely explained that items like that would have been turned into the police directly if found, per hotel policy. She let him know we'd be happy to cooperate if he wanted to file a police report. To our surprise, he suddenly became flustered. "And no, that's fine. I don't want to make a big deal. I'll just double-check my bags. I'm sure it's there." He quickly left the lobby, muttering about how he'd probably just misplaced it. We never saw him or the box again. As soon as he was gone, the team burst into laughter, realizing that he'd been caught off guard by the mere mention of involving the police. It became clear that our seizure medicine training was paying off. We'd learned to stay calm, follow policy, and not be intimidated by vague threats. Over time, more staff from other Crilton hotels started sharing similar stories. Each time a new trainee heard one, their eyes would widen and we'd joke, "Welcome to the club, you're officially on seizure medicine duty." To this day, whenever I encounter a guest who insists on retrieving some urgent forgotten item, I can't help but wonder what's really inside. But thanks to that one family, I've learned the power of sticking to protocols, staying calm, and recognizing that sometimes, a forgotten seizure medicine is just a cleverly disguised stash. And if another box does show up, well, it's always good to have a little reminder of our unusual journey in the form of that empty black box in the break room. It still sits there, a silent tribute to one of the strangest nights of my life, and the mystery of the seizure medicine that was really just cash. After that last incident, I thought we'd seen the end of guests using the seizure medicine trick at our hotels. But in the hospitality industry, it's always when you least expect it that something even weirder happens. One night, about 6 months after the whole black box debacle, I was wrapping up my shift at Chromewood Suites when a new guest checked in. This guy was middle-aged, sharply dressed, and polite enough, though there was something a little off about the way he spoke, overly friendly, like he was trying too hard to sound casual. He came in with just a single carry-on bag and his phone. The first night he was quiet and stayed out of sight. But on the second night, just as my shift was winding down, he appeared at the front desk, looking as if he hadn't slept. He leaned in close, speaking in a low, serious tone. "Hey, I need your help with something sensitive," he began. "I left something really important in my room. It's in a small case locked. I forgot to take it with me earlier and I really need it back." I asked for his room number and checked the system. To my surprise, he hadn't checked out, so I couldn't understand why he was acting like his belongings were missing. I told him he should be able to go to his room and retrieve it himself, but he looked uncomfortable, muttering something about not wanting to disturb his partner, who was resting. He tried to assure me it would only take a minute and that it was a private matter. I was instantly suspicious. "Sir, if it's in your room, I can't help retrieve it for you," I said, trying to maintain a polite but firm tone. "However, if there's something specific you'd like me to check with housekeeping, I'm happy to do that." He hesitated, looked around, and finally leaned in closer. "It's actually not what it seems. It's my sister's epilepsy medication," he explained, choosing his words carefully. "She left it with me for safekeeping and I forgot to bring it along. It's extremely important." At this point, I was having major flashbacks. Here we go again, I thought. It was all too familiar. The vague explanation, the pressure to act quickly, the insistence on some essential medication with a backstory that didn't quite add up. My radar was fully engaged. But instead of immediately calling my manager, I decided to play along a bit, hoping to get to the bottom of this mystery myself. I offered to call housekeeping to see if any items had been left behind, which led him to backtrack again, insisting it was probably fine and he'd try to get it later. He practically fled the lobby, looking over his shoulder as he went. Curiosity got the better of me and I couldn't help but wonder what this new guest was up to. When he returned to his room, I mentioned the interaction to one of my fellow staff members, who'd heard about the infamous black box story. Another seizure medicine case? They laughed, rolling their eyes. Must be the season for it. Later that week, the man checked out in a hurry and right after he left, I went up to housekeeping to ask if anything unusual had been found in his room. Our housekeeper shook her head, saying it was spotless. No medicine, no locked boxes, no mysterious items left behind. We laughed it off as another one of those quirky, inexplicable guest behaviors that only make sense in the world of hospitality. But as it turned out, the mystery guest wasn't finished yet. A couple of weeks later, I got a call from our general manager. He told me that someone had filed a formal complaint about insensitive handling of a private medical issue at the Chromewood Suites, naming me directly in the report. The complaint claimed that I'd refused to retrieve necessary medical supplies and insulted a guest's medical condition by questioning his needs. The GM was puzzled, as he knew I had a good reputation for professionalism, so he asked for my side of the story. When I explained everything, the locked case, the vague insistence on epilepsy medication, and how the guest hadn't actually checked out at the time, my manager started laughing. "This guy clearly has some kind of act he's trying to pull," he said, shaking his head. "Don't worry, we'll handle it. I'll send a polite response about our lost and found policies and let him know we're here for him if he has further concerns." The response seemed to work and for a while, everything quieted down again. But the story of the seizure medicine, the mysterious black box, and now this new epilepsy case became the stuff of legend around the two hotels. Every time we trained a new hire, we'd joke, if anyone asks you to find their sister's medicine, just remember, lost and found protocol only. It wasn't until much later that we finally found out what was really going on. One of our colleagues from a sister Crilton hotel, a few states away, called us up to share some news. They'd had a similar incident, where a guest had left behind a locked case and later made a huge fuss about important medical items. When the hotel staff finally found and opened the box, they discovered that it contained not medicine but a stash of luxury watches. Apparently, these weren't just any watches, they were vintage, collectible pieces, some worth thousands of dollars. The guest had tried to pass it off as medication in order to create a sense of urgency and reduce the risk of anyone tampering with the box. It was a strange, elaborate tactic that people like him used to protect valuable items, assuming that invoking medicine would discourage anyone from questioning their story. In hindsight, the entire ordeal made a bizarre kind of sense. The mysterious black box, the insistent guests, the increasingly odd excuses about important medications. They were all attempts to safeguard valuable items under the guise of medical necessity. These stories became training material for our entire staff. We even had a mock lost and found protocol drill where the managers acted out these elaborate scenarios so our team could practice keeping calm, following procedure, and not falling for vague stories about essential medication. As for me, I still get the occasional call from a frantic guest about some forgotten medication or sensitive item, and every time, I have to suppress a smile as I politely ask them to contact Lost and Found. Because now I know, in the world of hotels, the line between lost medication and luxury items is often blurred, and sometimes a seizure medicine is just a clever cover story for a fortune locked in a little black box. IA for signing up for a marathon last minute when my friend wants running to beat her thing. I, 38, am an avid rock climber, but I recently found out I'd need rotator cuff surgery, which obviously puts climbing out of the picture for a while. Climbing is my first love and main passion, so hearing I'd have to step away from it hit me pretty hard. In the meantime, I decided to turn to something I've always done casually, running. Running has never been my primary focus, but I've done a few races here and there, including one marathon, which I ran without training, though I don't necessarily recommend that. With my surgery on the horizon, I felt like I needed something to channel my energy into, something that could keep me motivated, give me a sense of accomplishment, and help me stay active. That's when I learned about a marathon happening near me just a week away. Even though I hadn't been training specifically for it, I figured I could push through if I paced myself, so I decided to try to get a bib. Around the same time, I found out that my friend was also planning to run the same marathon. Now, she hadn't done much training herself and was only just starting to prepare a week out, but I thought it might be fun for us to tackle it together, taking it at a slow, manageable pace. Since I was actively looking for a last-minute bib, I let her know what I was up to and how excited I was to join her if I could get in. She seemed okay with it at first, and I thought maybe we'd both have a good time bonding over the experience. After a lot of searching and networking, I finally managed to score a bib just a few days before the marathon. Feeling pumped, I posted about it on Facebook, mentioning how I was excited to run a marathon at the last minute and share in the experience with my friend. I figured it would just be a fun, spontaneous way to stay motivated and to celebrate something, especially with surgery around the corner. But then things took a turn. My friend saw my post and absolutely flipped out. She texted me really upset, saying that running this marathon was supposed to be her thing. She went on to say that I was making it all about me and that my post would overshadow her plans to share about her run on social media. She accused me of stealing her thunder and taking something that was special to her. I genuinely didn't understand her reaction. I never intended to make it all about me or to diminish her experience. I thought we could support each other and have fun with it. In hindsight, maybe I was a little naive. I thought we'd run side by side and cheer each other on. But from the moment the race started, we got separated in the crowd. I tried to find her, sending her texts and even calling a few times, hoping to link back up. I didn't get any response. At some point, I decided I'd run the marathon at my own pace and just focus on the experience for myself. About 2 hours into the race, she finally called me back. She was about 3 miles behind and asked if I'd wait for her to catch up. I'd already settled into my rhythm, and at this point I was fully in my own headspace, trying to finish the race as a personal goal. I told her that I'd see her at the finish line, thinking she'd understand. But instead, she was furious, saying that this was further proof that I was a selfish and unsupportive friend. She was so upset about me being ahead of her that she ended up quitting the marathon at mile 16 and cutting across the course to finish with a faster time than mine. I didn't find this out until later, after I'd completed the marathon myself. I finished in about 6 hours and 15 minutes, and despite the day's drama, I was proud of myself for pushing through. It was a big accomplishment, especially considering the lack of training and my upcoming surgery. Later I tried to reach out, thinking maybe we could clear the air. But she wasn't interested in talking. She told me that I'd betrayed her by doing the marathon and implied that our friendship would never be the same. She even said that she wouldn't be there to help me post-surgery as we'd originally planned, which honestly hurt. I was counting on her support, and it stung to realize she felt so deeply wronged by something that, to me, felt so innocent. Now she's adamant that running is her thing and that I should respect that by not participating in it. I think it's unreasonable. Running is something I enjoy too, and just because it's a big deal to her doesn't mean I can't also participate in it. I don't feel like running a marathon should belong to any one person, and I certainly don't think it's fair to dictate who gets to do what. The whole situation has me questioning if I'm in the wrong for not recognizing how important this was to her, or if it's as absurd as it feels to me. Am I really the bad friend here for signing up for a marathon, or is my friend being unfair by expecting me to give up something I enjoy? After our last conversation, I was left feeling really torn. On one hand, I could see that maybe I had overlooked how personally my friend connected to this marathon. Maybe, for her, this was something she had pinned all her hopes on as a major accomplishment. I know she's been going through some challenges herself, and perhaps this race represented a milestone that was bigger than just the physical feat. It was her way of proving something to herself. I get that. But on the other hand, I felt like she was being irrational and expecting me to hold back on running just because she wanted it to be her thing. Running is a public sport after all, and we weren't even racing competitively against each other. Besides, I genuinely thought that by joining her, I was doing something supportive and fun that we could bond over. The idea of overshadowing her never crossed my mind. If anything, I thought running together might make her feel more confident, knowing she had someone by her side. To add another layer to it, she's always been pretty vocal about how she's just getting into running. She's only done a few 5 Burmese shots before, and I had no idea she felt like she owned this new hobby. I respect her for wanting to make it her own, but it's not as if I'm some elite runner who'd be stealing her spotlight. I'm just a regular guy who's been running as a secondary activity because of my climbing hiatus. In fact, I thought she'd appreciate having someone with experience around to support her during the race. After she cut across the course and finished before me, I was left feeling pretty down. I just completed something I was proud of, but instead of celebrating, I was standing around the finish line feeling guilty and second-guessing myself. Did I ruin her day? Did I really take over her thing without realizing it? It cast a shadow over what should have been a good memory for both of us. Then came the messages. She began sending texts saying things like, You just don't get it. You ruined something that was supposed to be special for me, and you've always been one to take up space without considering how it affects others. I felt completely blindsided. As far as I knew, our friendship had always been built on mutual support, and we'd never had issues like this before. I responded to her, apologizing for any hurt I might have caused and explaining that I genuinely thought we'd both enjoy the day together. Her response was cold, and she doubled down on her stance. She reminded me that this marathon was supposed to be a big deal for her and accused me of posting on Facebook just to get more attention than her. This was the most bizarre accusation to me, as I rarely post on social media and only did it to share my excitement with friends. She even went as far as to say that if I really valued our friendship, I'd give up running future races to let her have the experience. I won't lie, hearing her say that made me feel a mix of frustration and sadness. I'd been planning to sign up for another race in the future to give myself another goal post-surgery, but now I was being told that, if I did, I'd be seen as a bad friend. It's strange because in any other context, I think she'd have been supportive. But running, for whatever reason, seemed to be a trigger point. I tried explaining that we could each have our own running journeys without stepping on each other's toes, but she just wasn't hearing it. Since then, things have gotten tense between us. She's refused to talk about anything but this betrayal and has now decided to distance herself entirely. She's even telling our mutual friends about it, painting me as a selfish and attention-seeking friend who couldn't respect her wishes. Meanwhile, I'm at a loss. The marathon was meant to be something to lift my spirits and keep me focused as I prepare for surgery. It was supposed to be something positive in my life, and instead, it's turned into this massive conflict that's taking up way more emotional energy than I ever expected. I never wanted to compete with her or make her feel less than. I just wanted to be there, enjoying the day and maybe share a moment with a friend. At this point, I'm starting to question if our friendship has been based on unspoken rules that I didn't know existed. I never thought running a race would threaten our friendship, but here we are. I've gone over every conversation and replayed every moment, wondering if I could have done something differently. But no matter how I look at it, I keep landing on the same conclusion. I didn't do anything malicious or with ill intent. So now I'm left wondering if it's worth trying to salvage this friendship or if this incident has shown me that maybe we were on different wavelengths all along. I finally decided to take a step back and really reflect on our friendship. I started thinking about moments from the past where my friend had similar reactions to situations that didn't seem like a big deal to me but seemed to really affect her. For example, there was a time a couple of years ago when I bought a new camera, and it turned out to be the same model she had just bought. She was excited about getting into photography and even joked that she was going to become the photographer of the group. I thought it was purely coincidental that we both got the same camera, but she made several comments about how I was trying to steal her hobby. I brushed it off at the time, thinking it was just her being playful, but now it seemed like maybe it was something more. It's strange because I've always seen myself as someone who's supportive of my friends' passions. If anything, I genuinely enjoy joining in on activities that make my friends happy, as a way to show interest in their world. I thought that was something most people valued in friendships. It's not like I was trying to become some professional runner or marathoner. I just wanted to participate alongside her and support her. The fact that it became this big point of contention has really thrown me for a loop. After a few days of silence, I thought maybe I should try one last time to clear things up. I texted her a heartfelt message, explaining again that I never meant to step on her toes or make her feel overshadowed. I told her how much I valued our friendship and reiterated that my intent was purely to do something fun together. I admitted that maybe I'd been a bit naive in assuming she'd feel the same way, but said that I'd love to work things out if she was open to it. A few hours later, I got a reply. She thanked me for reaching out but said that she still felt I'd overstepped a boundary and that running was something she needed to do alone. She explained that, to her, the marathon was symbolic, a way to mark a new chapter in her life, something she wanted to achieve on her own terms. I understood that, and maybe if she'd communicated this to me earlier, I might have approached things differently. I told her that, had I known, I would have gladly supported her from the sidelines or found another race to run on my own. She seemed a bit more receptive at this point, but there was still tension. She told me she felt that whenever she tried something new, I always seemed to be there in her shadow, unintentionally making her feel like she had to compete. That statement stung because in my eyes I'd never seen our relationship as competitive. I'd always thought we were each other's cheerleaders, celebrating milestones and sharing experiences. This made me start to wonder if our friendship had always been a bit one-sided. Had I been unconsciously walking on eggshells without realizing it? Were there other times when I'd unknowingly made her feel overshadowed? These questions kept swirling in my mind, and I began to consider if maybe I'd missed signs over the years that she felt this way. I even reached out to another mutual friend hoping to get some perspective. This friend was a bit taken aback but did mention that over the years she'd noticed my friend could be a bit possessive over certain activities or interests, especially if they were new for her. She didn't think it was anything personal against me, just something about how my friend approached new passions. Hearing this helped me see things in a slightly new light. I realized that, to my friend, this was probably more about her insecurities and need to carve out a personal identity than anything I'd done. I didn't necessarily agree with her response, but I could see how, from her perspective, this marathon felt like a moment for herself that I'd unintentionally intruded upon. She wanted the chance to prove something to herself, and my involvement, even though it was unintentional, had made her feel like that moment was taken from her. The part that was hardest for me to accept was her decision to withdraw her help for my surgery. I'd counted on her support, especially since she had offered it so eagerly before. Having someone back out during a vulnerable time over what I felt was a misunderstanding felt incredibly hurtful. But I also knew I couldn't force someone to be there for me if they weren't willing. I thanked her for her honesty and let her know that I respected her feelings. Since then we've barely spoken and it feels like we're drifting further apart. I've been trying to let go of the frustration and disappointment, reminding myself that I can't control how others feel or react. In the meantime, I've been focusing on preparing for my surgery and leaning on other friends for support. It's tough because, despite everything, I still miss the friend I thought I had and the good times we shared. I'd hoped she would eventually reach out, but as the days go by, it feels less and less likely. Reflecting on all this has made me realize how important it is to set boundaries but also to communicate clearly. I think in the future I'll be more cautious about assuming others will react as I do or share my perspective. This experience has taught me that not everyone sees friendship or shared interest the same way, and what might feel like a shared joy to one person might feel like an invasion to another. At the end of the day, I don't regret running the marathon. It was something that I did for myself and I'm proud of completing it, even with everything that happened. But I do regret that it came at the cost of a friendship that, for a long time, I held close. After a few more weeks of distance and quiet, I found myself missing the ease we used to have before all this happened. I kept replaying those times in my head. Simple moments like grabbing a coffee together, sharing our dreams and worries, or just cheering each other on over small victories. It hurt to think that something as simple as running could turn into such a wedge between us. One evening I decided to go for a run. This time I let myself run freely without any particular goal or expectation. I ran through quiet streets, down familiar paths, and just let my mind wander. Running had always been a way for me to unwind, to think, to process. I realized as I ran that night that it was never about taking over something that belonged to anyone. It was simply something I enjoyed, a space where I could be alone with my thoughts, my feelings, and my ambitions. Maybe that's what I hadn't been able to convey to my friend. I wasn't running to compete with her or take away her special moment. I was running to feel grounded, to feel like I had control over something as I prepared for the upcoming surgery. I was running for myself, for the mental and physical strength I needed to face the challenges ahead. This was something I'd done for years, something that had brought me peace long before it became her thing. And yet, maybe I had underestimated the power it held for her in a different way, especially now that I understood more about her need for personal milestones. After that run, I decided to write her a letter. I knew by now that trying to talk it out over the phone or through texts might just lead us back into misunderstandings. But in a letter, I could pour out my heart without interruptions or defensiveness. I could take my time to say everything I needed to say and she could read it in her own time. In the letter, I started by acknowledging her feelings. I told her that I respected her need to have something that felt uniquely hers, something that she could achieve on her own terms. I expressed my regret that my actions had unintentionally made her feel overshadowed, and that I understood now how the marathon was more than just a race for her. It was a symbol, a goal she had set for herself, and I should have been more mindful of that. But I also explained my side. I told her about how running had become my way of coping since I couldn't climb due to my injury, how the looming surgery was weighing heavily on me, and how I needed something that would remind me of my own strength and resilience. I told her that, when I signed up for the marathon, it wasn't about her, it was about holding on to something that grounded me. I shared that I'd hoped we could run together not as competitors but as friends, supporting each other through a tough but meaningful challenge. Finally, I told her how much her friendship meant to me despite everything. I wrote that I missed the connection we used to share, and that I genuinely valued her as a person and a friend. I didn't ask for her forgiveness, nor did I push her to mend things right away. Instead, I left it open, saying that I'd respect whatever she chose, but that I hoped she'd see my side as well and understand that there was no malice in what I'd done. I dropped the letter off at her place, hoping that, when she read it, she'd at least see things from my perspective. But I prepared myself for the possibility that she might not respond, that she might still feel betrayed or hurt. It wasn't an easy thought to sit with, but I felt a sense of closure just knowing I'd done everything I could to make amends. Weeks went by and life continued. I had my surgery, which was challenging, but I managed to get through it with the help of family and some of my other friends. I found myself leaning into those friendships, grateful for the support and kindness that others offered. During my recovery, I spent a lot of time reflecting, not just on this friendship but on how I approach relationships in general. I realized I'd been the kind of friend who jumps in enthusiastically, maybe a bit naively, assuming that everyone would welcome the camaraderie. This situation had shown me that people have different needs and boundaries, and that sometimes, you have to step back and consider their perspective more carefully. Then one evening I received a message from her. It was brief but sincere. She thanked me for the letter and said she'd read it a few times, trying to see things from my side. She admitted that, in her eagerness to have something that felt uniquely hers, she'd perhaps overreacted. She told me that she'd been dealing with some personal issues she hadn't shared with anyone, and the marathon had become a sort of anchor for her, a goal she felt could give her a sense of identity and achievement. She apologized for the things she'd said in the heat of the moment, and even for withdrawing her support during my surgery. She didn't propose that we instantly go back to being as close as we were, but she did say she was open to rebuilding things slowly if I was willing. I felt a surge of relief. Despite everything, I'd missed her friendship and the history we shared. I knew it wouldn't be easy to jump back into things, but I appreciated her reaching out and acknowledging her part, just as I'd tried to acknowledge mine. Over the next few months we reconnected bit by bit. It wasn't the same as before, but in some ways it felt healthier. We talked more openly about boundaries and feelings, and I noticed we were both more careful to respect each other's space. She found her own rhythm with running, participating in smaller races that she proudly finished on her own. I cheered her on from the sidelines, genuinely happy for her achievements without feeling the need to be part of them. Looking back, I think the whole experience taught both of us valuable lessons. For her, it was about finding her own identity and learning to communicate her needs without feeling threatened. For me, it was about respecting others' boundaries and realizing that not everyone views shared interests the same way. Sometimes, friendship means allowing each other room to grow individually, even if it means stepping back. Today we're in a good place. I wouldn't say everything's perfect or that we don't still have moments where we need to recalibrate, but we're learning to respect each other's journeys. And maybe that's what friendship is all about, supporting each other while still allowing space for individuality. It's a balance I'm grateful to have found, even if it took a challenging experience to get there. For not being friendly with my partner's daughters now that they've warmed up to me. I'm a 42-year-old woman dating Tim, a 59-year-old widower who has faced significant challenges in his life. His journey has been marked by the heart-wrenching experience of losing his wife to cancer, battling not one but 3 separate diagnoses. To provide her with the care she needed, Tim took drastic financial measures, racking up credit card debt, taking out a second mortgage on their home, and cashing out his retirement savings. His commitment to his wife's health and their family meant sacrificing his financial stability, and unfortunately, this led to a precarious situation after her passing. Tim has 2 daughters who live about 6 hours away from us, and I've been dating him for a couple of years now. Over that time, we made the decision to drive to see his daughters for Christmas, and I hoped this would be a chance for me to bond with them. However, both Christmas visits were incredibly awkward. The girls completely ignored me, effectively shutting me out of any family interactions. Whenever Tim tried to include me in conversations or activities, they would quickly intervene, dragging him away to talk to him privately, leaving me feeling like a complete outsider. Even their husbands wouldn't engage with me, they would talk over me, making it clear they weren't interested in making me feel welcome. After the first year, I thought things might improve, but the second Christmas was just a repeat of the first. I was frustrated and hurt by their behavior, but I understood that they were likely grappling with their emotions over their father's new relationship. Despite their grief, I felt it was unfair for them to take their feelings out on me, someone who genuinely cared for their father and was trying to support him. By the time this past Christmas rolled around, I had reached my breaking point. I told Tim that I simply wouldn't go with him to see his daughters anymore. I wanted him to have the freedom to see them without the stress of worrying about how I would be treated. I reassured him that I would never ask him to choose between me and his daughters. I just wouldn't put myself in a position where I felt unwelcomed and disrespected. This decision didn't sit well with Tim. He was disappointed because he valued our shared time during those long drives, especially since his back often bothered him, and I had been an enormous help in that regard. To show my support, I decided to lease Tim a comfortable luxury car to make the trip easier for him. His old car was practically a death trap, and I wanted to ensure he had a pleasant experience driving to see his daughters. When Tim excitedly called them to share the news about the new car and how it would ease the burden of the long drive, I had hoped they would respond positively. Instead, they exploded in anger. They accused him of using their mother's money to impress some bimbo bartender, implying that I was a gold digger looking to exploit his vulnerability. They expressed disappointment that he hadn't offered them any financial help for their weddings, suggesting I was somehow benefiting from his struggles rather than supporting him. The accusations were deeply hurtful, but what happened next was a turning point. During the argument, Tim was finally able to reveal the truth about his financial situation, something his daughters had been completely unaware of. They didn't know about the credit card debt, the second mortgage on their home, or the fact that he was facing foreclosure and bankruptcy. Their perception of him had been skewed by their assumptions. They had thought there was a life insurance policy to rely on, and they had no idea he had been struggling to make ends meet after their mother's passing. Once they learned that I owned the house we lived in and that Tim only contributed minimally to the household expenses, basically just covering the water bill and grocery costs, they were taken aback. The conversation shifted from anger to confusion, and I could sense a change in their attitude. After this revelation, they reached out to Tim, expressing their regrets about how they had treated me. They apologized for making assumptions and wanted to know if they could have my number. They said they were sorry I felt lonely during Christmas and even suggested coming to visit us next summer when they could enjoy the beach. I was taken aback by their sudden interest in wanting to connect, but I felt it was disingenuous. I told Tim I would not be giving them my number. I was open to being polite if they decided to visit while staying with him, but I had no desire to be friends with them. Their previous behavior had shown me a lack of respect that I couldn't just overlook because they now saw things differently. I stood firm in my belief that they had their chance to get to know me, and they chose to be catty and dismissive instead. Tim thinks I'm being too unforgiving and insists that they would have come around eventually, especially now that they understand how generous I've been with him. He believes that their newfound interest in me stems from their recognition of my support for their father. But to me, it feels like they only want to engage because their assumptions have been shattered, and it feels insincere. I understand that it can be challenging to navigate the complex emotions surrounding family dynamics, especially when a new partner is involved. Tim's daughters have been through a lot with their father's loss, and their reactions might have stemmed from a place of grief and confusion about their father's new relationship. However, that doesn't excuse the way they treated me. Their behavior felt more like an attack than an honest expression of their feelings. When I think back on the past holidays, I can't help but feel frustrated. I made an effort to be included in Tim's life and to support him, but the daughter's constant exclusion made it clear that I was not welcome. I felt isolated during what should have been a joyous occasion, and I certainly didn't appreciate being made to feel like an outsider in a family that I wanted to become part of. It's not as if I barged into their lives uninvited. I genuinely care about Tim and want to support him through his challenges. Now that they've decided to reach out to me, I can't shake the feeling that their sudden interest is insincere. It feels as if they've only warmed up to me because they've realized that their assumptions were incorrect and that I actually have been a positive force in their father's life. It's disheartening to think that their regard for me hinged solely on what they believed about my motivations. If they had treated me with respect from the start, perhaps I would be more open to forging a relationship with them. In addition, I worry about the impact their presence might have on my relationship with Tim. While I want him to have a strong connection with his daughters, I also don't want to subject myself to further disrespect or manipulation. If they can turn on me so easily based on their misunderstandings, how do I know they won't do it again? The fear of being disrespected again hangs heavy over my head. It also bothers me that Tim seems to expect me to just forgive and forget, to move on as if the previous encounters never happened. He believes that with time we could build a relationship, but I feel it's too soon for that. Trust is built through consistent actions over time, and they haven't shown me any reason to believe that they will treat me with respect going forward. Instead, I feel as though they want to jump to the end of the story without addressing the chapters that led us here. In light of all this, I wonder if I'm being unreasonable. Am I wrong for wanting to protect myself and my relationship? I want Tim to have a positive relationship with his daughters, but I don't want to force myself into a friendship that doesn't feel genuine. I know that relationships take time and effort, but I don't want to put in the work only to be met with resentment or hostility again. As I sit here reflecting on everything that has transpired, I can't help but consider the role of communication in all of this. It feels like a major breakdown occurred early on, and unfortunately, it set a precedent for how Tim's daughters viewed me. I understand that grief can warp perceptions and lead to misplaced loyalties, but it still stings that they were so quick to dismiss me without even attempting to get to know me. It's as if I was judged solely based on their assumptions, and I can't shake the feeling that their previous attitudes were more about their loss than about me. Tim has always been incredibly supportive and understanding, and I appreciate that he's in a tough spot, trying to maintain his relationship with his daughters while also cherishing what we have built together. He often tells me that family is everything to him, and I respect that deeply. But when he expresses frustration about my reluctance to engage with his daughters, I can't help but feel that he's overlooking the fact that they've been anything but friendly to me. It's almost like he expects me to prioritize their feelings over my own discomfort, which feels unfair. I want to be there for him, but I also need him to see my side of things. During the arguments with his daughters, I couldn't help but notice how easily they turned on him when he made decisions that they didn't agree with. Their anger seemed to stem from a place of fear of losing their father, fear of change, and fear that I was somehow taking away their place in his life. Their accusations about spending their mother's money felt like an attack on his character, and it broke my heart to see him put in that position. As much as they have struggled, he has also been through an immense amount of hardship, and yet they seem to ignore that entirely. The whole situation makes me question whether the daughters can genuinely change their attitudes toward me. Are they really interested in getting to know me now that they understand the dynamics of Tim's financial situation? Or is this just a way for them to ease their own guilt about how they treated him, and me, in the past? Their sudden friendliness feels less like a desire for genuine connection and more like a strategy to salvage their relationship with their father. I've had my own share of complex family dynamics. My parents divorced when I was young, and I know all too well how difficult it can be to adjust to new relationships. So, while I understand where Tim's daughters might be coming from, I also feel a strong urge to protect my boundaries. I don't want to relive the hurt I felt during those Christmas visits. I want to be open and welcoming, but I also don't want to be naive. I know that boundaries are essential for maintaining healthy relationships, and right now I feel the need to keep my distance. As Tim and I move forward, I know that these discussions will come up again. I worry about the potential strain on our relationship. I want him to have a good relationship with his daughters, but I also need him to acknowledge my feelings and experiences. There has to be a balance where we can both feel heard and validated. Perhaps in the future, if his daughters make a genuine effort to engage with me and show that they've changed, I could reconsider my stance. But for now, I feel like it's important to stand firm in my feelings. Ultimately, I know that building relationships takes time and patience. I just hope that Tim and his daughters can understand that my reluctance to engage isn't out of malice but rather a need to protect my heart. I hope that, in time, we can find a way to coexist peacefully. But until then, I need to take care of myself and set those boundaries, even if it feels uncomfortable. This situation feels like walking a tightrope. On one side, I have Tim, who I care for deeply and want to support in rebuilding his relationship with his daughters. On the other, I have my own emotional well-being and the past experiences that shape how I approach relationships. It's a delicate balance, and I often wonder if I'm doing the right thing by setting boundaries. Tim and I have had numerous conversations about this, and while I understand his desire to mend the relationship with his daughters, I also feel like he doesn't fully grasp the emotional toll their previous behavior took on me. He sometimes says, they just need time to adjust, but I can't help but feel that time shouldn't come at the cost of my feelings. I didn't sign up to be a punching bag for their unresolved grief or insecurities. I want to be included in Tim's life, but I also need him to acknowledge my worth and the respect I deserve as his partner. One of my biggest fears is that if I don't put my foot down now, their behavior will simply repeat itself. If I allow them to dictate the terms of our relationship without addressing the hurt they caused, it feels like I'm setting myself up for future disappointment. I don't want to be the person who stands in the corner at family gatherings, feeling sidelined and unwelcome. I want to build connections based on mutual respect, and that requires effort from both sides. As I consider the potential for a visit from Tim's daughters, I can't shake the feeling of apprehension. What if they come to our home with preconceived notions about me? What if they expect me to be the gracious hostess who overlooks the past? I can already hear the passive-aggressive comments in my head, how they might question my relationship with their father or make snide remarks about my background. It's exhausting to think about. If they do come to visit, I hope it will be an opportunity for us to have an honest conversation about our history. I want them to understand that while I'm willing to be cordial, it's not my responsibility to smooth over their feelings of guilt or resentment. I need them to recognize that trust isn't built overnight. It requires consistent effort and understanding. If they're genuinely interested in getting to know me, they'll have to be prepared to listen to my side of things too. Yet, there's a part of me that worries about how this will affect Tim. I can see how much he wants his daughters to be a part of our lives, and I don't want to be the obstacle standing in the way of that. But at the same time, I can't compromise my own needs for the sake of keeping the peace. I've seen too many relationships crumble because one partner sacrifices their well-being for the sake of the other. I don't want to end up resenting Tim because I didn't stand up for myself when I had the chance. I've thought about what it would look like to take a step back. Perhaps if I maintain a polite distance while allowing Tim to build a relationship with his daughters on his terms, it could create a healthier dynamic. That way, I wouldn't have to bear the brunt of their unresolved feelings, and Tim could still have the connection he desires. I'd still be supportive of him without feeling like I'm being dragged into the emotional minefield of their past. Ultimately, I know I have to prioritize my mental health and emotional safety. It's not about being unforgiving, it's about being realistic. If Tim's daughters are sincere in their desire to connect, they'll have to prove it through their actions. I'm open to the possibility of friendship, but it has to come from a place of mutual respect and understanding. I refuse to settle for anything less. As I navigate these turbulent waters, I remind myself that it's okay to be cautious. Relationships can be complicated, especially when they involve grief and loss, and it's natural to want to protect oneself from potential hurt. In time, perhaps we can find a way to bridge the gap between us. Until then, I'll continue to focus on what's best for me, holding on to the hope that eventually, we can all coexist peacefully. As I delve deeper into this emotional landscape, I can't help but reflect on the context of my relationship with Tim. We have a strong connection, one built on mutual respect, love, and understanding. He's shown me kindness and support in ways that have profoundly impacted my life. I never anticipated becoming involved with someone who had such a complicated family dynamic, but here we are. It's a journey that comes with its own set of challenges, but it's also a relationship I value immensely. The fact that Tim's daughters have a difficult history with their father is something I empathize with, even if their initial treatment of me felt unjust. I understand that they're grappling with their mother's passing and the emotional fallout that followed. Losing a parent is a traumatic experience that can shape a person's worldview, and I don't want to minimize the pain they've endured. However, I can't help but feel frustrated by their unwillingness to engage with me or to acknowledge my place in Tim's life. I wonder if their pain has blinded them to the reality of our situation. Their assumptions about my intentions have become a recurring theme in my thoughts. They seem to believe that I was taking advantage of Tim's vulnerability, when in fact, it was quite the opposite. I was the one who chose to help him after he lost everything. I saw a man who had dedicated his life to caring for his family, only to be left with debt and heartbreak. It was my choice to step in and support him, not because of any financial gain but because I genuinely care for him. It's frustrating that they haven't seen this side of me, and their refusal to engage in honest conversation only perpetuates the cycle of misunderstanding. Now that they've expressed a desire to connect, I find myself grappling with the complexities of forgiveness. I want to be open to the possibility of friendship, but I also need to establish boundaries that protect my heart. Their previous behavior isn't something I can simply overlook. It's a part of our history that needs acknowledgement before we can move forward. If they truly want to bridge the gap, they'll need to demonstrate their sincerity through action. I believe that genuine relationships are built on honesty and vulnerability, and I'm willing to extend that opportunity if they show they're ready. Tim's excitement about the prospect of mending his relationship with his daughters is palpable. I can see the hope in his eyes and it makes me want to support him even more. Yet, I also need him to understand my perspective. I'm not the enemy, I'm a partner who cares about his well-being. It's crucial that we navigate this as a team, addressing any underlying issues before they fester into resentment. I want to be included in his family dynamics, but not at the expense of my own self-worth. As I consider their potential visit, I think about how it might unfold. If they come to our home, I hope it's an opportunity for dialogue rather than an ambush. I want them to feel welcomed, but I also want them to understand that I won't tolerate disrespect or dismissive behavior. I envision sitting down with Tim and his daughters, discussing our feelings openly and honestly. Perhaps we could share stories about our lives and our experiences, building empathy and understanding in the process. I believe that vulnerability can pave the way for deeper connections, but it requires effort from everyone involved. At the same time, I'm acutely aware that not everyone is equipped to have those difficult conversations. I know that emotions can run high, especially when it comes to family dynamics. If tensions arise, I'll need to stay grounded and remind myself that my feelings are valid. It's okay to stand firm in my boundaries, even if it makes others uncomfortable. I refuse to compromise my self-respect for the sake of maintaining peace. Ultimately, I hope that this journey leads us toward a place of understanding. I want to find common ground with Tim's daughters, and I believe that it's possible if we all come to the table with open hearts and minds. I want them to know that I'm not a threat to their relationship with their father, but rather someone who wishes to support and uplift him as he navigates this new chapter of his life. If they can accept that, perhaps we can forge a new path forward together. In the end, I remind myself that relationships take time. Trust is not built overnight, and healing often requires patience and empathy. I'm willing to be a part of this process, but I also need to prioritize my own emotional well-being. As I reflect on my role in this intricate web of relationships, I hold on to hope that we can find a way to coexist peacefully. For not being friendly with my partner's daughters now that they've warmed up to me? It's a question I ponder as I navigate the complexities of love, loss, and family dynamics. As the days go by, I find myself wrestling with the decision of whether or not to open my heart to Tim's daughters. While I recognize the importance of family and the healing that can come from mending relationships, I also understand that boundaries are essential for my own well-being. One evening while I'm sitting on the patio with Tim, I share my thoughts with him. I tell him how I feel about the situation and how much it means to me that he's supportive, but that I also need him to understand my hesitation. He listens intently, nodding as I voice my concerns about their past behavior and my desire for them to approach me with genuine respect. Tim assures me that he'll stand by my side regardless of what happens. Finally, the time comes for their visit. I've decided to remain cordial but firm in my boundaries. Tim's daughters arrive, and their initial excitement is palpable. They're eager to see their father, and I can't help but feel a flicker of hope that this will be a turning point. I greet them with a smile, offering warmth while maintaining a subtle distance. Over the next few days, we navigate the challenges of blending our lives. Tim and his daughters share stories and laughter, and while I observe from the sidelines, I can't deny the bittersweet feeling that washes over me. I want to be part of this family, yet I'm cautious. When the moment feels right, I initiate a conversation with them. I express my willingness to be amicable but reiterate the importance of treating each other with kindness and respect. To my surprise, they seem receptive. They apologize for their past behavior and acknowledge that they let their assumptions cloud their judgment. This moment feels significant. It's a step toward understanding. We share more conversations, slowly breaking down the walls that have stood between us. By the end of their visit, something has shifted. While we're not instant best friends, there's a newfound sense of respect that wasn't there before. I can see that Tim is happy, and that joy radiates through our interactions. I realize that relationships can evolve, and it's okay to take time to build trust. As they drive away, I feel a mix of relief and hope. I've remained true to myself while allowing for growth and understanding. Tim and I embrace, and I know that we'll continue to navigate this journey together, hand in hand. The experience has taught me the value of patience and the importance of setting boundaries while remaining open to connection. I can't predict what the future holds, but for now, I'm grateful for the progress we've made. As I reflect on the path ahead, I hold on to the belief that with time, empathy, and honest communication, we can create a family dynamic that embraces love, support, and understanding. In the end, it's not just about being friendly, it's about forging relationships based on mutual respect and the willingness to understand one another. And as I look toward the future, I'm hopeful that we can continue to grow together, one step at a time.